It's Wednesday, June 7, 2017, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the Futures Lab studio at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons, and here with me are my colleagues Mike McKean and Earnest Perry. Is she the next Edward Snowden? We'll talk about the arrest of NSA contractor Reality Leigh Winner and why the federal government thinks she's behind those leaked documents that The Intercept published earlier this week. Sadly, we've gotten good at covering terror attacks like the one Saturday night in London, but still, this one brought new concerns, like what do you do when the president politicizes the event before the details have even been confirmed, and then ends up picking a fight with the city's mayor for his faith? And we'll talk about the call for Bill Maher's ouster from HBO. He's apologized for using the N-word on Friday night's episode of Real Time, but is that apology enough? There's a lot more that hopefully we'll get to as well before the half hour is up, but I want to start with a local media story, something we don't get to do as much on this program as we used to. Maybe you saw it in the Saturday Tribune, the column from the paper's new publisher, explaining some of last week's staff reductions, which included the sports editor and editorial cartoonist. But the changes at one of our hometown papers seemed even deeper to me and to a lot of the commenters and the sites, the Tribune sites on the website itself and on Facebook, when they were explained through an awkward and seemingly inappropriate analogy to the pruning of the big tree out in McBain a few years back. Your reaction to that column?
Well, it reads like an out-of-towner coming in and looking for a lame analogy to explain a difficult decision, and it blew up in his face. I mean, talking about getting rid of a very prominent editorial cartoonist, getting rid of a very prominent sports writer, and comparing it to lopping off the dead limbs of a tree was not a good way to get your audience on your side.
At least he didn't take the analogy one step further and say it's so that the Tribune can stand 1,000 years like the columns.
Yeah, when I read that, and actually I was out of town, and I got back in, and I immediately had to go to a dinner function, and someone there was basically telling me about it, and we sort of talked about it, and they asked me, what do you think about what's going on at the Trib? And I said, this is indicative of what happens when Gatehouse takes over a newspaper.
And before we completely and totally point the finger at Gatehouse, it would actually be kind of par for the course whenever any kind of a large corporate ownership entity would come into what is a town the size of Columbia where there had been a family-owned newspaper going back more than 100 years.
No, that's true. That's true. I mean, the column, when I got home, I read the column. Yeah. And I think Mike is absolutely right. I mean, there's so many other analogies that they could have just the publisher could have just came straight out and said, this is what we're doing. But in trying to sort of provide some sort of analogy to make people feel better about what they've done, just made it even worse. I mean, Joel Jasper, who's been here for a while, been here a long while, and is a fixture when it comes to sports in this town. He pretty much wrote his own goodbye column. Yes. and basically told the community, pretty much set it up for the publisher, and instead of publisher saying, hey, this is what we've done, he, in the sports analogy, he whiffed. He literally whiffed when he had an opportunity to really, tell the public, hey, this is what we're doing.
I mean, it's not unusual, sadly, in this day and age for local newspapers to be contracting, covering less with fewer people, partly because of corporate takeovers, but the corporate takeovers are occurring because the local family-owned media can't sustain economically the way they used to. The problem is you've got to somehow innovate your way out of this problem and not just keep cutting. Right. And it seems to me this is a really good opportunity for someone in Columbia to build a digital-only product around a new business model with more focus on quality reporting and more emphasis on engaging the community. They could take the Tribune's lunch from them.
I mean, it's going to be, to me, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the next 6 months. Because if you pick up that newspaper now compared to what it was just early in the fall before all this happened, I mean, there was within a year, there was a lot more local news. There were a lot more stories that people cared about, especially on the sports page. I mean, what really shocked me was last week in the sports section, you had I think it was South or North Callaway High School baseball team, won its first state baseball title. And it was a 4-paragraph story on the inside on page 2, where normally that would be front sports news.
Or, another story that was glaringly missing, and there's part of me that wonders how much of that is because of the shift from an afternoon paper to a morning paper and perhaps how workflows haven't adjusted yet. But I kept looking all afternoon on Monday and all evening Monday and into Tuesday morning for some kind of a TikTok about happenings going on here on campus and those layoffs that were happening and in what departments or what areas or who was being affected. And really it was KMIZ that led the reporting on a lot of that throughout the day. And 6 months or a year ago, that would have been the Tribune.
Right. Well, I mean, the other thing is, and this is what people are starting to realize, is that a lot of what goes into the Columbia Daily Tribune is coming from Austin, Texas. They send the local stories, which are few and far between now. They send those all the way to Austin, and then they send it back for printing. So basically what's happening over there on the corner of 5th and Walnut is mainly the printing press is going, but everything else is being done out of their hub down in Austin.
I just wish I was a little bit more optimistic that someone will step into the vacuum. The Columbia Missourian, the university's paper, could be
and it has
that source.
Stepped up considerably in that time since the
Its
Tribune
local
went.
coverage has gotten a lot better, and you're seeing a lot more of the local stories in the Missourian that you would normally see in both papers. You're seeing more of it in the Missourian and less of it in the Tribune.
I don't think you're going to see it on the local television stations, with the exception of occasional stories you mentioned, because their audience is just so much broader geographically. They're not going to focus their resources on the in-depth stories in Columbia. The radio stations are not going to do it. KBIA might do the feature-based long-form stories, but they're not going to cover the day-to-day story. So who's going to do it?
Well, and it's interesting because we have that conversation and see the difference, and we have our own personal connections to the Missourian through the School of Journalism, so we're going to have a vested interest in seeing it succeed. But as much as everyone says, don't read the comments, I can't resist. I always do. And so many of those comments on Facebook and on the Tribune's website were readers and members of the public, subscribers of the Tribune, who were saying, you know what, the Missourian's giving me what I need and you're not, and I'm going across the street.
Yeah, but I think Mike is right. I mean, this is an opportunity for someone to come in with a different business model, a different way of producing news and information that is going that the public wants, that the audience wants on a local level. Because you're right, they're not going to get everything that they need or even everything that they want from television news because of the wide audience base that television is trying to get.
The wide audience and the influence that consultants have that make every television newscaster across the country.
Somebody could step in with a really light approach. I mean, light by meaning not a lot of employees, but a really clear mission, doesn't have all of the overhead and infrastructure of a printing press or a broadcast tower or whatever.
Or delivery.
Somebody could come up with a plan. There are some local bloggers who've done some things. You think about Columbia Heartbeat, for example.
Which has recently gone dark, too.
But, I mean, there are models that you could see around the country for somebody stepping in and doing a better job.
Okay, well, interestingly enough, as the little paper that could was cutting back, editors at the New York Times were facing the same thing. And among those not making the cut, the paper's public editor. She wasn't in the job long, having just taken over for Margaret Sullivan a bit more than a year ago. It's never fair to compare how two people do the same job, but Liz Spade never quite found her footing in the position in the same way that Margaret Sullivan did.
You know, and some people are trying to make it a left-right issue. I don't think it's that. I mean, I do think Margaret Sullivan was just a unique person at the right time. She's a very good writer. I think maybe a better writer than Liz Spade. But Liz Spade was taking on some different challenges as the public editor, including trying to deal with questions about the legitimacy of news and whether or not we're going to be perceived as being the opposition party in Trump world. And a lot of the New York Times readers didn't want to hear that. I think Margaret Sullivan was more in line with kind of the liberal sensibilities of that paper than Liz Spade was. What I think is unfortunate, though, is that this is like the last of the big-time public editors. PBS and NPR, well, PBS had one and says they're replacing that person. NPR still has one. Nobody else that you can think of has somebody doing this job.
Well, I mean, the Washington Post had one at one time. The Los Angeles Times had one at one time. And the one place left standing in newspapers was the New York Times, and now they're moving away from that. And
the Chicago Tribune does still have one, Margaret Holt, who is a Missouri School of Journalism grad and a friend of our school here. But you're right; they are fewer and fewer between.
But I think the overall problem. I think you're absolutely right. I think that Margaret Sullivan was there at a time when you could and she was good at what she did. You could really see that she was bringing a perspective to the New York Times and holding the Times itself accountable for a lot of different things. Now that we've moved into this highly politicized, highly polarized, I mean, at the top levels of government and everything else that we do,
we need this position more.
We need it more
ever.
and more, but I don't think that the person at the
Mike
New York
doesn't
Times,
agree with us.
No, I agree.
I just
with you
don't
completely.
think that she was the person to make that happen.
What I worry about is I even will take the publisher of the New York Times at their word when they say, well, we do think that we have a robust reader engagement program. We're going to count on our readers through social media and our website to police us. I don't think that they necessarily are just saying that as eyewash, but there's a difference between having the public out there and having somebody inside that newsroom who can go into the editor-in-chief's office or another editor's office and get answers for the public.
Right.
Dare I say, somebody who could provide context.
Yes.
Well, doesn't this one feel a little bit like deja vu? An early summer story of documents leaked by an NSA contractor and published. Only this time the accused leaker, Reality Leigh Winner, has been arrested and charged with removing classified documents and mailing them to a news outlet. The documents, published Monday by The Intercept, outline details of a 2016 military intelligence cyber attack on a U.S. voting software supplier, though there isn't any evidence that the hack affected any votes. How did the feds end up tracking Winner down?
I mean, I'm not sure we really know that, but from some of the reporting that's been out there so far, one, apparently The Intercept sent to try to get verification, from the federal government, a copy that had a crease in it that was obvious it had been photocopied by somebody within the organization. That led them to check their phone records, and apparently they found that the NSA contractor had made a phone call to The Intercept. The Intercept apparently sent or told another outlet that they talked to somebody in Augusta, Georgia, where she was from. So even if the federal government didn't have all these tools to track them down, the Intercept kind of left it wide open.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at this, it's sort of like the Intercept, knowingly or unknowingly, outed their own source. I mean, it made no sense. It's like, are you that inept?
Sloppy, irresponsible? What is it?
Both.
Okay.
It's both sloppy and irresponsible. I mean, but
yeah,
the other side of it is that the source, Reality Winner, was vocal on her own social media against the administration.
Edward Snowden being one of the few accounts she followed.
Yes. And
she had a role model.
Exactly. And then on top of all of that, I mean, they made it easy for them to track it to her. So not only did The Intercept have some irresponsibility, but the source herself had some irresponsibility, if everything that's come out in the last 24 to 48 hours is true.
Right. I mean, The Intercept has done some really aggressive reporting in this space, and kudos to them for doing that. What I worry about is that major news organizations now are setting up more secure means by which they can get these kinds of leaks.
Most of them are.
Yeah.
So the bigger ones are supposedly doing that.
That's it, maybe. Here.
It may only take one or two cases like this, because the Trump administration, just like the Obama administration, if they find you, they're going to prosecute.
And where then does that, in all seriousness, that could create a chilling effect from the whistleblowers who might otherwise be willing to go ahead and share the information, because Reality Winner becomes, the poster child of maybe keeping your mouth shut, you better move.
But, I was thinking about this.
Yeah.
And yes, this could create a chilling effect. But when you look at the number of leaks that have come out since, even before Trump took office, but definitely since he's been in office, I mean, these are high-level leaks. These are leaks within, at least they appear to be leaks within the White House. So, I mean, when you look at her leak from an NSA perspective, yes, it's damaging. But from Trump's standpoint, politically, that's a minor one compared to all the other leaks that are coming out that you're seeing in the Washington Post and the New York Times almost on a daily basis. These are government officials in high places in strategic areas that are leaking this information. It's going to be much more difficult for Trump and the FBI and others to get at them than it was to get at her.
Okay. Well, Saturday night, another round of terror attacks in Britain, again with responsibility claimed by ISIS. But the coverage this time took a different tone when the president tweeted in the immediate aftermath. First a retweet from Drudge Report and then this. We need to be smart, vigilant, and tough. We need the courts to give us back our rights. We need the travel ban as an extra level of safety. Never mind that at that point we had no idea that the three events were linked or that they had been committed at the hands of ISIS. Oh, and by the way, that was the president acknowledging that those travel restrictions he's been fighting so hard for in the courts is in fact a ban, but I digress. But it's what led to those tweets that led to, and the conversations that transpired, that helped take this coverage into left, or shall I say, right field, forcing Fox News hosts to make this statement following an interview with Brexit leader Nigel Farage, in which he suggested a need for the internment of Muslims.
Earlier on the show, we had a couple of guests mention the word internment, the idea of internment camps as a possible solution to this. I think I made it well known my feeling on that, which I find reprehensible. But on behalf of the network, I think all of us here find that idea reprehensible here at Fox News Channel. Just to be clear.
No suggestions of that.
Absolutely.
So Fox is actually having to go on the record and saying, we don't support internment camps. I just feel like I keep having to say to myself, this is not normal. This is not normal. This is not normal.
There's a lot of ways it's not normal. There's a lot of ways. And one of them, I mean, first of all I saw was that clip. I don't know what preceded or came after it. I'm glad Fox News's anchors or hosts had the guts to go on and say what they said because it needed to be said. But it's really interesting because the media now, especially the cable channels, are taking shots at each other in real time. So, you know, CNN is all over that story almost immediately after it comes out with a little help from Media Matters and some other folks. And then Fox is pummeling CNN just as soon as something comes, the Kathy Griffin thing or other stuff like that. And they're all at war with each other trying to carve up this audience.
Ernest, I'm going to tee it up for you because then it creates the situation where we're covering ourselves and it's not about us.
It's not about us. I mean, what drives me, because this is a serious story. I mean, people died in this incident. More people could have died in this incident. And it's the third one in a month in Great Britain. And here we are. Talking to each other as supposed journalists. I mean, I'm getting to the point where I'm not calling them journalists. They're basically just talk show hosts.
They're pundits. They're talk show hosts and pundits.
And they're what they're talking about is what someone else said in reaction to what the president tweeted out. And it's almost like this constant need to respond to the president's tweets, and that's the thing that I think has really become a problem for the media.
And how many times have we said it? Less of this left-right blather, more journalism. That's the answer, right? The other thing that I think is interesting about this is, and I heard an analyst on NPR yesterday, I don't remember who it was, I forgot, but they were basically saying with regard to U.S. foreign policy now, if we didn't know it, we know it now. If you want to know what our foreign policy is, don't listen to the Secretary of State. Don't listen to the Department of Defense. Don't listen to our intelligence community. Go to Twitter, because that is where you're going to find out what our foreign policy is.
At the same time, the administration then says, oh, but that's not an official statement, which is kind of bunk, if you ask me.
Well, he can say that, but when he sends out a tweet like that, he may be talking to his base, and he may be talking to others, but the people who are listening are the 9 justices of the Supreme Court who are going to be looking at that travel ban. And he can say all he wants. Don't listen to me.
It's intense vetting.
Yeah. I mean, don't listen to what I'm saying over here, but read what I put, what my Justice Department put in here. That's what you need to review. I'm telling you, that is not going to fly. It didn't fly in the lower courts, and I'd be really surprised if it flew with the Supreme Court.
And this isn't the only story where this applies. I mean, look what just happened with the business with Qatar. And, you know, Trump is going on Twitter and basically stirring up the nest with an ally that's providing us with 2 military facilities. Now, you can argue whether or not we should or should not be supporting Qatar, whether they should or should not be providing financing for terrorism or whatever, but our State Department sends one message, but the real message that is being acted upon in the Middle East is that tweet from the president.
Right. Okay, well, when I think back on this, it feels like a lifetime ago, but it was just last Thursday when the president announced he was going to pull the U.S. support and involvement in the Paris Climate Agreement. As you would have expected, the media covering the announcement that was made in the Rose Garden included voices both in favor and against walking away. But some of the most interesting coverage came from National Geographic and the Weather Channel. The Weather Channel had a full-on homepage takeover with a main headline that read, "Now that Trump has pulled us out of the climate agreement, what's next?" And 8 more stories with headlines that said things like, "Sad day, global reaction to Trump's decision," "Still don't care, proof you should," and "More proof," and even more proof. You get the idea. There was no pretense of objectivity here.
None. I mean, the Weather Channel, I mean, when bad weather happens, that's where people go. And I think what they were trying to say is, look, climate change is real. It's happening. We've been documenting it for years. Here's the proof right here. It's one of those things where it's almost gotten to the point where I remember as a child, there was a whole argument about whether or not cigarettes were bad for you, and then we finally got to the point, yes, they are. The proof is there. It's been documented, and now the courts have decided. I mean, I'm starting to wonder, do we have to take climate change to court in order to be able to finally say,
I really
yes,
don't mean to laugh at you. Yeah.
Yes, you know, it is something that is really happening.
Scopes trial all over again?
I think so. I mean, it just amazes me.
And I really don't think that these examples you cite from the Weather Channel or National Geographic are all that unusual. If you looked at mainstream media coverage of this story, there wasn't any objectivity in the sense that you asked the question, and there shouldn't be.
No, because
this is established. It's fact.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though, to me about the Weather Channel. Think about it, too. Unlike some other niche sites, like we always talk about in television news producing, weather is the one story, the one segment that affects everybody, regardless of gender, of economic status, education status. Because if it rains, you're going to get wet, right? Doesn't matter who you are. So it's interesting to me, too, like the Weather Channel is going to reach so many people. And think about the Weather Channel app and how prolific that is on people's phones. I know I go to it several times a day looking for the running forecast or just what is the humidity. And to see that, too, it isn't even though you're going and necessarily looking for that news or that information, and it's in your face. Yeah. Okay, well, Senator Al Franken, he's been working the talk show circuit hard, promoting his new book, but he's canceled his appearance scheduled for this Friday night on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, following Maher's off-the-cuff remarks this past Friday during an interview with a Republican representative from Nebraska.
To Nebraska more. You're welcome. We'd love to have you work in the fields with us. Work in the field? That's part of that. That's Senator. I'm a house. No, it's a joke. Thank you.
You can hear some gasps among that really awkward applause, and Bill Maher has apologized, but I don't know, is it enough at this point, or is it time for him to go?
I keep going back and forth. We have a column on our Links blog by a columnist for the Chicago Defender.
T-Shawn Taylor, another Mizzou grad.
Another Mizzou grad. I suggest that our audience read that because I think it gives you a broader perspective of how the N-word is used, when it's used, and it talks about it in 2 different ways. Bill Maher, the way he used it, which I definitely do not agree with, but then it also talks about the way Larry Wilmore used it in
the White House
Correspondents' Dinner.
The mic drop.
Yes, right, a year ago. So, which I also don't agree with, but you know, it gives you some perspective on it. I mean, the way I look at it is, don't use it. Don't use it whether you're black, whether you're white, whether you're Asian. It doesn't matter. Don't use it. You know, it is offensive regardless of what context you use it in, and it's unnecessary.
Yeah, it wasn't necessary. Right. There was no context there.
Right.
If anybody was going to step in it, I mean, you might have seen Bill Maher doing it. I mean, he had a show, 10 years ago called Politically Incorrect, and he's always been politically incorrect, although his politics are generally liberal. He says things that get him in trouble or that provoke. And I think what happened here, even he knew that wasn't a smart thing to say, but he could not help himself. Senator Ben Sasse from Nebraska set him up. I don't think Sasse was saying anything racial when he talked about working in the fields. He was talking about farmers in Nebraska. But Maher could not help himself, and he jumped on that. He caught it right away. He apologized, but I don't think that apology is going to be enough. I don't know what's going to happen, with his show this week, but that's pretty tough.
I don't know whether or not HBO is going to pull the show, because this show at certain points in our political world and in our political calendar really works for HBO. This is not one of those times. The question becomes, is this big enough for HBO to say, you know what, we can figure out another way to reach this particular audience?
And let's also go back to the HBO slogan of it's not TV, it's HBO, that it is a subscription service meant for an adult audience at most times, where perhaps they have this assumption that an adult audience analyzes.
Yeah, but that wasn't an adult statement.
No, it wasn't. Okay, well, Bill Maher wasn't the only one apologizing this week. Comedian Kathy Griffin is in pretty hot water, too, after a photo shoot that showed her holding what looks like Trump's severed head.
The image is too disturbing. I understand how it offends people. I beg for your forgiveness. I went too far. I made a mistake and I was wrong. Okay,
there's that, but then there's this too.
I don't think I will have a career after this. I think he, I'm going to be honest, he broke me.
So, I don't know, is that an apology or is she blaming Donald Trump for the backlash? I can't tell.
She's just trying very hard to manage a message that is totally out of her control. I mean, she's lost the gig with CNN on New Year's Eve with Anderson Cooper, which provided her with some credibility. What she did was not smart. You can decide whether you think it was right or wrong. I mean, there gets to be a point where, if artists and comedians can't be a little over the edge, then that's not good for society. But I'm not defending what she did this time.
So how does this compromise the network any more than, say, Reza Alsan, who has a documentary-style program that airs on Sunday nights, tweeting calling the president a piece of poop? That's my word. He used a different four-letter word.
Well, I mean, I think he's going to suffer for his actions as well. I haven't heard whether he's going to be suspended, but I know that there's talk that that's going to happen. I think in Kathy Griffin's issues, it was more along the lines of even if the person is the president of the United States and you don't make those kinds of gestures to the president, regardless of what you think about it.
Okay, well, we are pretty much out of time this week. I'd like to thank you for spending the last half hour with us. Read more about the topics we talked about today on our links blog under the Programs tab at KBIA.org. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. Our handle there is @ViewsOnKBIA. These are all great ways to watch and listen to our program again, leave comments or questions, see what we'll be talking about next week, and more. Our thanks to RJ's Travis McMillan for directing today's show, and to Pat Akers for handling the audio. Tim Pilcher composed our original theme music. I'm Amy Simons. Be sure to join us again next week when we're back with you for another edition of Views of the News.